Hi, John Greger from Cold Snap Photography with some more tips and tutorials. Tonight I'm going to be talking about shooting night panoramas. I've done a previous video about how to shoot panoramas, and I'll put a link in the comments below where you can view that video as well. I'm using a Fuji camera X-T5 with a Zeiss 2it 12mm lens. That's equivalent to about 18mm on a full frame. I like this setup because it has great characteristics for shooting night skies. Very little noise, very high quality optics with little chromatic aberration, and great sharpness for the optics. Optics are key for shooting night skies. You have to have good optics. Kit lenses just don't cut it. You need something that is at least a step above that. The tripod I'm using is a really nice sturdy tripod. It's a very heavy-duty tripod, and it has some features that come in real handy for shooting panoramas especially. First of all, I'd like to note that it has a little spirit level right here on what's called the yoke of the tripod, where the three legs come together. Having that level there is very, very handy for shooting panoramas, as we'll see in just a little bit. It also has a ball head. I have a really right stuff ball head that's marked off with degrees. That can be handy for beginners as well, so they can tell where they're rotating and how far they've rotated to shoot the panorama. I'm assuming that you've done your homework during the day, that you've scouted a location that you like, that you know that it's going to have a nice night sky component to it, and you're familiar with where that is so that you know roughly how you want to frame your image. But doing the daytime work gives you great success at nighttime. So get out during the day, scout the locations, anticipate where the Milky Way will be, whether you need to use something like photo pills with their augmented reality feature to show you where the Milky Way is going to show up in the landscape, or however you have to line it up. But I'm assuming you've done that and you've chosen your location carefully. The first thing you need to do is place the tripod where you want to shoot the scene from. You place the tripod. The next thing that you need to do is level the yoke, that area where the three legs come together. That's why having the little spirit level is real handy. You level that by adjusting the legs either up or down until you get that spirit level in the center or level. If you don't have a spirit level, bringing a small level that you can put on the yoke of the tripod is real handy. Once the yoke is level, then all you have to do is level the camera on the ball head. I used my internal digital level on the back of the camera to do that. And so I level the camera. Again, if you don't have that, having a small level with you so that you can make sure that the camera is level is very handy. If the camera is level and the yoke is level, when you spin the camera to shoot the panorama, it will maintain level throughout it. So I usually check. I level the yoke until I get it as level as I can. Then I level the camera, and then I check the camera, making sure it stays level as I spin it through what the duration or the sweep will be of the panorama that I'm going to shoot. Once you know that everything is nice and level, you need to figure out where you're going to sweep, how you're going to make the sweep or the swing of the panorama. Where is the Milky Way falling? Where are you placing it in the frame? What elements do you want to use to the left of the Milky Way, or whatever the prominent star feature is, and what elements do you want in the frame to the right? You establish those and where they're at visually, and then you start your panorama before that, at least a frame before where you want the image to begin. You end at least a frame after where the panorama ends. Once you establish the composition, or what the panorama is going to include, you need to establish your point of focus. Most good night shots, because really what I'm talking about are landscape photographs at night. Most good landscape photographs at night have an element that's fairly close in the foreground that you can key off of for the composition of the image. The method that I like to use best, particularly if I have something that's fairly close to me, is to use the spotlight method for focusing. I use a very powerful flashlight. I take that flashlight and I shine it at the object that's in the foreground so that I light it up, and then I take the camera and I position the camera on that point where I'm shining the flashlight, and I can put the autofocus feature there and hit that, and many times it'll pick up with the autofocus. If it doesn't, I can also manually focus by simply looking through the viewfinder on that hotspot in the image. It's a great way to make sure that you have that element in focus, because you don't have a whole lot of depth of field. You're probably going to be shooting at a wide open aperture. The stars are going to be sharp. You don't have to worry about those. They're pinpoint light sources. Once you have the focus established and the framing established, you have to figure out what your exposure is going to be. So typically for night skies, you're going to be somewhere around wide open. If you have a 2.8 lens, that's great. 2.8, f4, f1.4 if you have even faster lens is fine. Your ISO is going to be somewhere between probably 3200, 6400. You need to figure that out with your camera and do a test exposure. And I usually do that test exposure right wherever the Milky Way lines up, so I know that I'm getting a good exposure at the Milky Way. Once I set that exposure, whatever it might be, 30 seconds at f2.8, at 6400, or whatever it works out to, that's what I shoot the entire panorama at. So I have the camera in manual exposure mode so that when I swing it, it is going to maintain a consistent exposure throughout. It might be a little bit dark on one end, but that's okay. I don't worry about that. I'm in manual exposure mode, manual focus mode, because I've established my point of focus. Now I'm ready to take the photograph, and I have to figure out how far do I make the swing each time I take the shot. You notice that I'm using a vertical orientation, and that's because I want to get as much of the night sky as possible. That gives me a lot of real estate up above in the sky where all the action is. So if I'm using a 15 millimeter lens, it's about 100 to 110 degree view on the long dimension. It's about an 85 degree view on the short dimension. If I'm using a 20 millimeter lens, I've got about an 85 degree view this way and about a 65 degree view on the short dimension. If I'm using a 28 millimeter lens, I've got about a 65 degree view this way and about a 45 degree view on the short dimension. So, depending on how wide your lens is how far a swing you will do between shots. Assuming that you have something that's like a 15 or 20 millimeter pretty wide lens, about a 30 to 45 degree swing is going to be plenty for getting enough overlap. You want to overlap each shot at least 30%. If you overlap a little more, that's fine. You just end up with a few extra shots, and that's not a problem. If you have a longer focal length lens, you're going to make that swing a little bit less, something more around 25 degrees to 30 degrees to get that overlap. So you just determine what that is. If your ball head has these nice markings on it to show you the degrees, you can simply follow those as you turn the camera and make the exposure one to the next. If you don't, you just have to kind of go by feel. And quite honestly, that's what I do anymore. I just kind of go by feel. If you do a couple too many, it's not the end of the world. It'll still work out just fine. Once the images are captured, I bring them into Camera Raw. If you use Lightroom, that's just fine. There's really no difference. But I open them so that I can batch process all of them at the same time. I choose the frame with the Milky Way in it, select the rest of the images, go through the adjustments as how I want to adjust them to get the look and feel that I'm after. Once I have them all adjusted, I open them into Photoshop. When they're open in Photoshop, I go to the File drop-down menu to Automate, down to the Photo Merge. I open them in the Photo Merge dialog box, and then I select the cylindrical setting, which I feel gives the best results for a panorama on nature scenic panoramas. You'll notice that it comes in handy at this point to have those extra frames shot, because it gives you a little bit more leeway in how you crop the image for the final look. And frequently it will round the corners of the sky, and by having the extra frame, you don't have to worry about having to clone in extra material or something. And here we have our final image. Panorama images work just great for night skies and Milky Ways, in particular earlier in the year, in the spring of the year, when the Milky Way arches. It's great to place them over a variety of different subject matter and pick up a little bit more content left to right. I hope these tips have helped.